that was me as a fully grown man, perfectly nailing the Angels of Delusion idling dance, to distract you from the fact that I'm a month late. Ooh. You don't even realize I'm a month late. Ooh. You have no sense of time. Ooh. I'm actually winded after that. I think I needed an anime cooldown after the 44 show roundup from summer. But I'm back now, and who knows if I'll be on time for the winter roundup. I sure don't. Anyway, I'm breaking my rules a bit this time, because this roundup, we are starting with Gachiakuta. Oh! If you can't tell by my reaction, the shit rips. Alright? Gachiakuta fucking rules. Every fight scene in this is better than the last. Like, here's Gachiakuta's thing. I've talked about this before when I talked about the manga. I've talked about the manga a couple times in previous videos. In my opinion, Gachiakuta's kicker, right? It's not just this really well-structured battle shonen with a compelling premise and a well-paced narrative. It's that it's different in its presentation. It's just weird. It's different from other things. Everything from its unique character designs to its setting, like the universe, the setting that it's in, the powers, abilities, everything about it just breaks the mold somehow. It's just the presentation of it is different from other battle shonen, which is obviously a good thing. And I think it's what you have to do nowadays to really get people's eyes on you. You can't just make another Naruto and call it good anymore. There's an incomprehensible amount of things you can watch at any given point in time, but even just narrowing that down to anime, there's even an incomprehensible amount of anime you could watch at any given time. And there's so much new stuff constantly coming out. You have to be different to get people to pay attention to you, and that's what Gachiakuta does in every regard in its presentation. Because once it has your attention, it just nails the story, it nails the animation, the visuals, it just keeps being fun, and that keeps your attention. It's just a completely masterful anime adaptation. Like, if you really boil the story down to its core, Gachiakuta really isn't all that much different from other shonen of yesteryear, right? It's got a big, expansive world, plenty of characters with varying degrees of importance that help fill out the world, a silly sense of humor sometimes, and a narrative that escalates in stakes as more and more fights go down. But the building blocks that create the shonen experience completely break the mold in terms of just how they're presented to us. Because while its formula might be very similar to other shonen, it still has every element that makes a good shonen anime so compelling in the first place, right? So it's so strong fundamentally as well. Characters have good backstory to prop up their motivations and character traits that fit in well with Gachiakuta's unique world, and some of it is pretty fucked up, like with Amo. And we gradually up the stakes as it goes on, leading to more and more dramatic and intense fights. The big arc worth noting here, the Trash Storm arc that happens in the second half, and that really the final third, the last 8 episodes or so of this, is a pretty standard first big arc for shonen. Again, when you really boil it down, you know, it pits characters who have idealistic dichotomies against each other, almost so that the fight matchups feel like they couldn't be a coincidence. And we learn a little more about the characters through their trials and tribulations, get some backstory dropped in the middle of it, and it all culminates with a big fight that changes our very understanding of the setting, of the world. Again, pretty standard formula there, but again, the Trash Storm arc is very fun and engaging. I think it's very good. Basically, all that is to say, Gachiakuta fucking rules. It's got a great setup, fun, unique characters, solid story and pacing, fantastic visuals and animation. Like I said, Bones absolutely killed it. Amazing music. God, the music is awesome. The unique power system it has, the abilities, the vital instruments are super cool. Very different from a lot of other shonen. And again, that's the thing. Most of all, it's different in just about every way that it presents itself. It's a high grade but standard issue. darker shonen anime in the guise of this cool punk-ass dystopian vibe where dudes fight using and against trash. Like, if you're someone who likes other shonen anime but think all new gen shonen are the same, I think Gachiakuta will give you the kick in the pants that you're looking for. I think it's pretty comfortably in the top 10 of all shows I've covered over the past 4 years of these roundups. Just go watch it, man. So awesome. So good. Next up is Tougen Anki. I kind of mentioned something similar just now, but this is pretty much just Naruto if it was about demons instead of ninjas. But in fairness, I actually think this is a pretty good reminder that Naruto's formula as an action shonen stands the test of time and does the job damn well. There's a reason a lot of other new gen shonen anime sort of model their formulas after what Naruto did. This is a perfectly acceptable modern shonen anime. No major complaints from me. And I say this, right, but if you're the type of person who has seen a decent amount of shonen anime and are the type to drop something that doesn't particularly interest you, this might not be worth starting. But imagine you're like 12 years old and just getting into anime as a whole. This is absolutely strong enough to become that one anime for some kid that ends up becoming the gateway into more anime, shonen or otherwise. You know, like that one show that you know really isn't the greatest thing ever, but you end up really nostalgic for because you watched it as a kid, and it's still pretty decent. And you know the thing about shonen anime, we like our fights. 3D animation that they use in the fight scenes for this is actually great. Like, the action sequences in this are strong. The characters in this have weird yet somehow kind of endearing quirks and personalities about them. Like, they're not the most compelling characters ever, but they are perfectly acceptable. They work fairly well as a cast. Like, they're certainly not particularly memorable, but I wouldn't call them forgettable either. Although actually, regarding the characters, a lot of them don't actually develop out of some of the weird shticks that they have that would suggest that they're in need of some character development. An example that comes to mind is the pink-haired girl, who's a little nervous and unsure of herself and her ability. So sometimes she's like, "You all don't need me here, I'll just go jump off a bridge so I won't bother you," etc. But she never grows out of that in the span of these 24 episodes. She never even really works on her ability that much. This show takes the Jujutsu Kaisen route of fighting rather than the fairy tale way of fighting. Now, I'll explain myself. That is to say, this show prioritizes characters who can already fight for the sake of having cool fights in the show, rather than using fights as a method of growth, even if it means putting characters in nigh unwinnable situations that are overcome using the power of friendship. So those are two extremes, I think, but it is a spectrum. And actually, I have to say, I think I'd prefer if this particular show went the fairy tale route. Some of these characters really could have used it. All that being said, though, I do think the Naruto and Sasuke equivalents here are treated fairly well throughout this and have some reasonably good growth. I forget their names. The actual plot of this is also kind of just okay. The first half, I'd say, was actually, I was more invested in it than the second half, but the second half was still fine. It just does a lot of things pretty fast. It also doesn't really feel like it builds much on itself, just as a whole. Like I said before, because it uses the Jujutsu Kaisen route of fighting, it feels like a lot of the actual fights, especially in the second half, are ultimately like empty. They don't mean much to the plot as a whole. The show just kind of puts our characters here into various situations where they're being hunted by different squads of the Momotaro, who want these Onis wiped out, right? I do appreciate that it takes time to build up proper arcs around these confrontations, and there are some wrinkles and nuances in the second half that are fairly interesting, but it just doesn't really feel all the way there to me. I'd say this is somewhere between like a 7.5 all told, which is fine, right? Like I said, if this was the first shonen anime I'd ever seen, I'd probably like this way more. Like, I'd go read the manga and everything. There's enough to it to get someone invested. I won't say a child, but I'm just saying, if I was a child, I would like this a lot more than I do. Next up is Watari-kun's is about to collapse. Is actually bleeped out in the title. So it could be Wiener, for all we know. I don't know how to feel about this. I truly don't even understand the mindset of creating this story in the first place. Like, if a rom-com is not, by and large, meant to make you laugh and or smile, then it's probably meant to convey some specific themes that it wants to get across. But I am at a complete loss about what this one wants to achieve as an artistic creation. I truly do not understand what it's going for. Its pacing feels weirdly fast a lot of the time, like it jumps between things without much or any buffer. Characters do things that they themselves realize are stupid or pointless, but never actually do anything to change or develop out of that mindset, and instead write it off as adolescence and hormones, and even the writing and dialogue is bland and indistinguishable from any other generic harem show you decided to watch on a particularly lonely night. And by the end, I sort of understood, like, the point where the story, like, where the show wanted to end up. I understood where it wanted to get to, right? Because Naoto and Satsuki were an item by the end, and it sort of felt more like a bland high school rom-com that at least had its head on straight and was trying to be funny but not really succeeding. But the journey that we took to get there was just baffling to me. I truly don't understand, even if we're just looking at like the main three, even if we go to the main four, you know, we look outside of Naoto and Satsuki and move to Yukari and that one guy whose name I don't know. Just the way that they're constantly dealing with the drama between themselves, truly baffling. The thing about it is Yukari was so, I don't want to say devoted, but she was into Naoto for a long time and was willing to put up with a lot of shit. And I think her crush is sort of explained somewhere around the middle of this show, like the reason why she's into him. But then Satsuki's interventions constantly were just like, you know, maybe she was trying to get in between them, being like in a playful, annoying way, like, who knows what she was trying to do? Like, again, the point where it ended up, I'm like, okay, yes, I see the end goal, but why did we take this weird roundabout journey to get there? It was insane, and none of it really made sense, and I didn't really end up caring that much about how it ended. Like, I'm just like, okay, you wasted my time. Like, yeah, I could have seen that coming when I started this show. I knew this is where it was gonna end up. And yet you took me on a 24 episode fucking spiral into goddamn insanity. It's not like I hate the characters or anything. Like, in their normal interactions, for the most part, I think they're perfectly likable, even if they do dumb shit. A lot. And yeah, they're bland, but they're acceptable. It's just the way this show handles them. It does them absolutely no favors. It's just the bouncing between weird plot points that don't make any sense. Like, this one's truly baffling to me. I don't even know what else to tell you. Like, what the fuck? A few years ago, I made a, looking back on it, I think pretty bold prediction. Turns out I was wrong. But I ended up here in the end. So, I guess that's what matters. Next up is Chitose's in the Ramune bottle. What would happen if a bunch of good-looking high school kids had the amount of self-reflection of a man going through a midlife crisis? Find out in this new show, Saku Chitose is the coolest guy ever. Tuesdays at 8 p.m. on NBC. Look, too bad about the delay. But this is normally the kind of show that I'd be like, damn, what does this show even think it is? But I guess I'm already kind of nostalgic for it. That being said, it really doesn't waste your time at all. I was surprised at just how fast the first episode got everything going and got everything it needed to get across in practically record time. Normally, I would say this show has its head up its own ass, but its cast of characters, I think, even now, are genuinely fun and likable. The sense of humor, seeing it in the anime, it's not fantastic, I don't think, although maybe that's just my age talking. if I was in high school, you know, if I was 10 years younger, the XD random style of humor this goes for would probably work a lot better with me. That said, it really does offer a different perspective on this kind of high school slice of life romance stuff. I mean, there are layers to this, to a lot of what the characters, you know, think and experience, and even an idiot like me can tell, you know? Saku has a sarcastic case of main character syndrome, an ironic case of main character syndrome, where he realizes that not everything is about him, the world doesn't revolve around him, but he takes what he gets into and purposely makes it out to be more important than it is in his mind for his own pleasure. You know, when you're a kid, your school, your little town is all you have. And they realize that. They're perfectly, especially Saku, we hear a lot of his inner monologue. He's perfectly aware of that, which is why he does that, where he makes a joke out of the world revolving around him and plays things up in his mind so that he can fully enjoy himself. And I do think as it goes on, he becomes much, much more of, not necessarily relatable protagonist, but at least one worth rooting for on a fundamental level. And now that I see this in anime form, I realize that the dynamic Saku has with all the girls, like, where he's weirdly self-centered, but also thoughtful and witty, but also a little pervy sometimes, but is also the guy they trust the most, is so blatantly something out of a weirdly niche light novel that it hurts me. Not that I think it's a bad dynamic, as experienced in the context of the anime, but wowee. Kenta's little arc is a great way to get the series started. Yuko is the easiest of the main girls to get a read on, and her and Saku's efforts to help Kenta also help us understand them as characters and what kind of show we're getting into. But listen, it's no surprise that I think Yuzuki is far and away the highlight of at least this part 1 of the series. I honestly don't want to bother getting too into it, but again, it's got a lot of layers, right? She mentions the Yuzuki Nanase packaging that boys like about her, which is such a high school anime thing. Yuzuki's story is one that you sort of understand on an emotional level, because when you try to put it into words, it ends up long and overbearing. Trust me, I did try. I ended up highlighting and hitting backspace on a whole lot of it. But for me personally, Yuzuki was one of the first light novel characters who I practically fell in love with at first sight, like 4 years ago. And her arc here makes her all the more endearing, in my opinion. If you've seen this, like, you get it. You know, she's the best part of this first part of the show, hands down. And it only has partly to do with the fact that she's voiced by Ikumi Hasegawa. I'm coping, but my God! Now, is this a slice of life show that's kind of up its own ass? Absolutely. But this show, compared to other shows that are in this like upper tier slice of life romance harem genre, this actually dedicates time that other shows would use on like establishing shots or awkward silence, instead on its characters and the dynamic between them. The dialogue is generally fun and easily gets across who the characters are. And again, maybe it's nostalgia talking here, but for a slice of life, I actually dig this show a lot. It's no One Piece, and it's really not even a 2.5 dimensional seduction for me. It doesn't quite hit those levels. But if you're one of the people who genuinely loves slice of life anime, watch this show. You will thank me later. Specifically this style of like kind of harem romance stuff. It's exactly the kind of show that waxes poetic for no fucking reason that specifically male slice of life watchers absolutely eat up. And the dialogue feels kind of like a Redditor wrote it. But not like that guy who made the video to the CEO recent. Not that guy. Like, this is like a cool Redditor, but he's still a Redditor. You know, kind of like the logical extreme of cool for a Redditor, wherever that is. Next up is My Friend's Little Sister Has It In For Me. Congrats to this one for escaping development hell. Woohoo! Now, again, this is another one whose light novel I've been reading for a handful of years. I'm not up to date or anything, but I knew what I was getting into. And this one, between this one and Chitose, this one in particular does kind of come off as like, oh, it's just another Uzaki-chan or Nagatoro type thing. Because, you know, we've got a super unserious Kohai with her more serious main character, Senpai, but it does establish a nice concept from early on with how Aki, the main character, is all about efficiency and can't understand why you'd mess with or tease someone who you're into romantically, since that sounds like a waste of time. And a majority of Iroha's screen time is her doing exactly that. So it's very much establishing that sense of contrast. But also, this one is at least a little deeper than your typical annoying Kohai anime. In fact, aside from the sort of hook with Mashiro from the start, and the fun yet predictable twist with Sumire-sensei, the kicker bit isn't actually overtly revealed, at least, until a bit later, although it's not exactly subtle before the reveal. You can sort of get a grasp on what Iroha's role is in their little game-making squad before it's actually told to you. But her situation with her family clashing with her dream of being a voice actress does give her character some much-needed depth, so I appreciate that. Also worth noting, I think the characters' quirks are very well designed to interconnect with each other, to incite various kinds of drama that helps the characters grow to understand themselves and each other, which should really be what the adolescent time of your life should be about, right? The characters talk through their problems properly, which doesn't always happen in these types of anime, and I generally like the vibes that each notable character brings to the table. They're all very unique. Special snowflakes, if you will. And sort of on this same note, I do find Iroha's particular brand of being obnoxious relatively endearing compared to other shows in this genre. Even if she's still being deliberately difficult, Mashiro can be a little frustrating, but as a contrast to Iroha, she works well. And the other main characters, Sumire-sensei, Ozu, and Otoe, the music girl Otoe, that's the one, don't have much to do, but are all fun in their own ways as well, fairly fun. The drama club stuff towards the end is really the only noteworthy plot thing that acts as any sort of meaningful story arc, and I do think it's good. Again, like most of the show, it's fun, it's silly, and it does a lot to actually help not just Aki and Iroha's character arcs, but also their relationship with each other grow. Again, like most of this show, it's fun, it's silly, and it actually does a lot. A good amount to help not just Aki and Iroha's characters, but also their relationship with each other grow. Although the way it eventually ends with them subbing in for the Romeo and Juliet play is a little contrived, but it's fine. A little predictable as well. It's one of those weird anime things that's like, them doing this actually means a lot more for their character arcs beneath the surface than them actually just doing the thing. You know what I mean? The actual story, plot that plays out here really isn't particularly notable, but it's certainly not all that boring either. This one's got a surprising amount of substance with a solid sense of humor throughout. It's a pretty enjoyable watch in my humble opinion. Like, sticking with this one a bit rewards you. I can't help but like it. Again, maybe that's my nostalgia talking. I thought it was pretty good. Next up is Sanda. I like this one's spirit. Not the spirit of Christmas. I mean, I do like the spirit of Christmas. I just mean this one's heart is in the right place. Interestingly, this manga is by the creator of Beastars. Huh. I am gonna have to come up with a name for this soon, but this one has that Chainsaw Man, Call of the Night, whatever thing where we've got a dystopian, ultra dystopian situation here, and the characters don't have a good handle on their feelings since they're young and only know the particular parts of the world that they've experienced firsthand. This particular dystopian future is actually kind of like alarming. Like certain characters, like the school's headmaster or whatever, really drive how alarming this particular future is. All that being said, like I said, this one's heart is in the right place. it's not so much about Christmas itself as it is about just giving children a sense of wonder and hope in a society that has forcefully deprived them of that, which in this case is represented by Santa Claus. So thematically, I think that's pretty spot on. That theme itself actually doesn't really play much into the plot, ironically, but it is there. Because a lot of what happens is surprisingly just fucked up and kind of weird. Just a few examples. Sanda, the kid who can now transform back and forth between a scrawny teenager and a massive buff Santa Claus, is engaged to this kind of crazy chick by the school they're at so that they can eventually have babies and repopulate the country or whatever. But when his inner Santa Claus awakens, he suddenly starts seeing kids as like these innocent small creatures who should be protected and have their wishes granted. Basically, he becomes an old man in his mind. And that Santa Claus mindset is not just when he's Santa Claus, it also ends up leaking over to his scrawny teenager mind. So anytime something flirty happens between him and his fiancée, the inner 14-year-old and the inner Santa Claus really clash, making for some just really weird inner monologue. Another example, the sort of secondary antagonist who's not all bad, right, is the small girl who acts like the leader of this neglected class who murdered their teacher. That girl's mother was not all the way there in the head, which warped her daughter's idea of the laws of nature and what was normal, which led her to spiraling into near insanity herself and rebelling against society in any way she could. So she was out there, this girl who's leading the class to kill her teacher. Again, this kind of went back and forth there, but this is the same girl who's, killed her teacher, her mom's fucked up. She was out there brandishing knives and guns as like a 10-year-old girl, just shooting people over and over. And the headmaster, who I briefly mentioned just a second ago, and the headmaster, who I just mentioned a second ago, man, he had like 95 plastic surgery operations so he could look young at the ripe age of 92 or whatever he is. But he's full on dedicated to the way this new society handles children, all the way to the point that he eventually tries to get the crazy little girl to kill Sanda, Santa Claus, herself. There's like an anti-St. Nicholas military unit, and there's this guy in it who sort of defects to help Sanda after being inspired by their youthful spirit or whatever. And the chick who's missing at the start, which is kind of part of like the hook, the premise, actually gets found halfway through, which is interesting because then we learn more about what happened to her and why she was being hunted down by the higher-ups at the school. But she's got a thing for the main girl in this, whose name I forget. I wrote it down. Fuyumura. She has a thing for the main girl, Fuyumura, which spirals into this whole other weird thing that ends with, well, you get it. If you've seen this, you get it. And Fuyumura herself is a whole other can of worms. It gets really weird, I tell you. All that said, though, even if I think it's weird, I do think this show generally handles what it tries to do fairly well, and like everything lands the way it's supposed to, I think, weirdly. Which is weirdly. It lands weirdly, but it's supposed to. And the art style in this is peculiar, but different, and the animation is pretty good as well. So, I don't know. It's not my thing, but I definitely see why people would like it. My status as an assassin obviously exceeds the hero's. This is a pretty mixed bag for me. Now, I am sort of familiar with the light novels for this. Actually, I sold the 4 volumes I had. They went on eBay, I think, the exact day this show started airing. But me selling them isn't exactly a good look for this show, huh? Just my personal taste, but... Anyway, this adaptation is visually pretty strong. The fight scenes are actually engaging, fun, and there's sort of a lingering mystery that hangs over this one with Akira's shadow magic and how it pretty much has a mind of its own and can start moving Akira's body when he's on the brink of death and has lost his own consciousness. Although, of course, we don't actually figure out what exactly the deal is with it. It's just this weird, unique skill that he has, and with an AI integrated into it for some reason, and that's all we get. And we have to accept it that way. Yes! I love not following through on plot points. But for all of this one's upsides in the fighting department, I think it suffers just as much from being overly edgy. At least in my personal opinion. And that's not just about Akira himself. It feels like the whole show is like a straight shot right at the very specific subsection of anime fans who strongly prefer their anime to be all serious all the time, and you know they go on Twitter and vote for their favorite shows and ships in those little Twitter polls where they're like top 10 characters of the season, week number 3 or whatever. And also who don't like when their intelligence is insulted. I'm sure you know the kind of anime fan I'm talking about. It might even be you. The show moves at a really fast pace, and nothing really sits all that well after it gets delivered. It just doesn't spare any breathing. For example, I don't remember which episode this is, but it occurred to me, so I wrote it down as an example. And this pretty much happens exactly as I'm about to describe it. One scene, you know, maybe within the first 5 minutes or so, it's like, you have Akira questioning some guy, and he's like holding him by the neck, and he's like, "Where's Amelia? Tell me where you took her. I'll kill you if you don't." Except he doesn't kill anyone, despite being an assassin. Whatever, fine, don't care. Next scene, 2-minute lore drop about the history of the world, like why demons are so widely hated and discriminated against or whatever, despite there not being an ongoing war per se. Which is fine in itself, in theory, like a 2-minute lore drop, whatever. Okay, I can deal with that. And then immediately after, the next scene, there's fighting. They get straight into fighting. It's almost to the point where nothing actually feels important. It feels like there's no emphasis placed on a lot of the more important parts. A lot of the important scenes feel just as throwaway and or important as any other scene. And I find Akira as the lead character to be so bland and boring. And it's not because he doesn't kill anyone. That's actually the most interesting thing about him. He has no defining character traits other than being edgy and overpowered. And that he's out for vengeance, against the king or the princess and or princess for killing that one general guy who looked out for him when he first got summoned to the Isekai, and then framing him for that guy's death. Also, one more, actually, that he loves Amelia. It doesn't really feel like he loves Amelia. Feels completely one-sided on her part, but they could explain it. Like, at the beginning, he kind of immediately excludes himself from the rest of his class that got summoned. He was always a loner, but now he immediately excludes himself using his assassin skills and goes off to do his own thing. And after he gets framed, he meets Amelia. So, does he come to love her because he's desperate to keep by his side the one person that he thinks won't betray him out of loneliness? Which eventually turns into love? Or maybe he's deluded himself into thinking everyone around him is guilty until proven innocent, thinks they might betray him, and because she owes him for saving her life, she won't betray him, hence he can let his guard down around her. Who knows? The show doesn't actually explore any of that. It could be anything. You could argue about it on Reddit. There's no answer. Even when, at the very end, when Akira's quest for vengeance is questioned, like he starts questioning himself, he gets that fucking video message from the general guy who took care of him. The general guy's like, don't go do vengeance for me. So he's like, so now Akira's quest for vengeance, he's like starting to question himself. He's like, oh fuck, was everything I did pointless? Like the general guy doesn't want Akira to become a murderer, even though he's an assassin. Like, once you kill someone, they're still going back. Or whatever. And despite the warning from the video message, the post-mortem video message, Akira ends up going through with the assassination anyway, and killing some dude who absolutely deserved it. The whole, second half is dedicated to that guy who ends up killing his evil underground schemes, right? Including but not limited to capturing winners of a random-ass beauty pageant that appears for one episode and then goes away. Kidnapping and or killing, who knows the extent of it. Either way, they're never to be seen again after they win the beauty pageant. And by the way, you know, it actually just, that assassination job, killing the guy, ends up being a perfectly normal assassination to the point we don't even see it happen in the show. He just rears back and then it cuts to outside the mansion and he kills him in his sleep. So, a little anticlimactic there. But then after he does go through with the murder, and you know, there was the whole warning, like, they're still going back if you become a murderer. He's like, oh man, I'm afraid of myself now because I felt nothing after killing a man. But actually, maybe if Emilia will always be there for me, by my side, then it's probably not a big a deal. And that's it. So, pretty impressive character arc. Emilia's better, but she's still boring. There's a plot point where she was exiled from her elf kingdom because her younger twin sister manipulated practically everyone to think she was Emilia, was a cursed child of some kind, so that the twin sister could have everything that she thinks Emilia stole from her. Mostly that comes down to attention. That plot point does get resolved, but that doesn't really affect Emilia's character at all. In fact, Akira literally fights Emilia's twin sister for her. So he's already in, this is like episode 4 or something, he's already in no one can touch her mode. And I'm pretty sure the light novel mentions it, but the anime never specifies how long they spent in the dungeon together, so for all we know, they could have known each other for like 2 hours by this point. So in the end, even this big plot point, which should be focusing on Emilia, ends up feeling like a dud, because Emilia doesn't actually grow from it, and the twin sister really was just being a brat. And that's what it comes down to. Like, she undoes her hypnotization spell, and that's the shebang. Knight is another relatively uninteresting addition, where his only thing is, oh no, if I take my demon form, I might hurt you, master. No, I'm strong. I won't let you hurt anyone. And that's Knight's entire character arc. And pretty much every other notable character does basically nothing, has nothing interesting about them, and is utterly replaceable. I say pretty much because thank God for Laddie in this show, because she's the only injection of anything silly in this whole show. But again, even Laddie, other than being silly, she does basically nothing. She's an interesting contrast with Akira in terms of what motivates her. Like, she's kind of trying to accomplish a similar thing to him, but wants to do it in a different way. But again, nothing even comes of that dichotomy. This show has a lot of that, where it creates points of potential interest or conflict and then never brings them anywhere significant. So again, visuals are good. Everything else, Next up is May I Ask for One Final Thing. Man, I really enjoyed myself with this one. I really did. You know, at the very start, when this one was doing its like self-introduction as a series, setting up its premise, I was like, I swear to God, I've seen this exact same thing before. Like, the exact same thing in another anime. And even when Scarlet goes to punch the pink-haired chick who stole her fiancé, I still kind of felt that way. But then the rest of the show happened. It is so refreshing from like a young boy, 9-year-old boy point of view to watch a fantasy villainous anime where the protagonist, instead of skirting around everything and just being like, oh, I wish this handsome prince would just leave me alone. Instead of that, Scarlet just fucking beats the shit out of people for 13 episodes straight. It rules, man. Literally, that is her solution to everything. And the show does a great job with the sense of humor as well. It's super dry, timing is spot on. Like, legitimately, this one had me laughing out loud pretty frequently. Like, between the knocking out of important societal figures after pleading for their safety and the pretty regular occurrence of Scarlet sending dudes into the stratosphere for no reason, this one is perfectly set up to appeal to the 9-year-old child in me. And plot-wise is not bad at all either. There's a good amount of world building, enough to pique your interest at any given point. It progresses along at a nice pace. Nothing groundbreaking here plot-wise, but enjoyable. And man, I could just watch her beat the fuck out of people all day. That's really what it comes down to. So, I really enjoyed myself. Next up is This Monster Wants to Eat Me. This is another one of those fucked up supernatural slice of life shows that depicts characters in very unique ways. This one's solid as well, I think. This one uses visual storytelling very well, and I think it really helps that its main cast is small. In fact, there are maybe like 2 other characters besides the main 3 that were actually named, and had any significant role to play. So keeping the focus on the main 3 kept it feeling focused, and it kept the story moving along at a good pace. The emotional journey they take is actually pretty compelling, I think, and I also think the main 3 characters are handled well by the show. I feel like I can understand them, what they do, and how they are throughout this pretty easily. So this show clearly also does well with conveying the story and the emotion behind it. I think this one in particular is actually a little less fucked up than others in this genre. Like for The Summer Hikaru Died, for example, it's kind of like wholesome, but it's hard to see past how weirdly fucked up it is at the same time. But for this one, it's actually just kind of wholesome. This one actually seems more fucked up at the start than it ends up being once you learn everyone's backstories and motivations and such. And at least for me, the way they round off Hinako's story just seems to be an allegory for life in general, right? Because we're all headed for Valhalla at some point. We're just delaying the inevitable. Or at least that's one way to look at it, right? So I think that's sort of what Hinako's story gets across, even if it's in a roundabout and symbolic way. If we're all headed for Valhalla anyway, might as well make good use of the time we have, that kind of thing. Anyway, this is pretty good. It highlights the ups and downs of the human experience and has a decent story arc with fun little supernatural elements. I liked it. Next up is My Awkward Senpai. My god, this is cute. Like, disgustingly cute. I had a fucking big-ass goofy smile on my face watching the show the whole time. So adorable. It's a pretty standard office romance formula, but the way this show focuses in on Azusa's inner monologue, the main girl, the blonde one, focuses on her inner monologue throughout, makes her super charming. Because it actually makes us as the viewers much more familiar with her inner self and how earnest yet clumsy she is, as opposed to the coarse and aloof version of her that the characters around her actually know. I just can't put enough emphasis on how stupidly cute Azusa is throughout this. Like, somehow she allows the feelings of, I want to root for her and hope she ends up in a happy romance, and also, I want to marry her right now, coexist. She allows those 2 things to coexist inside of me, which is pretty miraculous. And, you know, like I said, there's plenty of formulaic stuff about this. There's some misunderstandings throughout, like when that one coworker that Kamigawa thinks is a guy and likes Azusa is actually a girl. And Azusa thinking Kamigawa's sister is his girlfriend. You know, the works. But this is just super charming and sweet throughout. Every episode is cute in a slightly different and fun way. And it does build on itself. You know, especially near the end when the supporting cast starts really pushing for the main 2 to get together. So the pacing is pretty decent as well. Like, no complaints from me. If you like this cozy slice of life romance style of anime, man, do yourself a favor and watch this. It is so cute. Next up is A Star Brighter Than the Sun. Again, this is very cute. I don't think it falls too outside the realm of any other run-of-the-mill high school age romance anime shoujo thing. But, and I've said this a lot, I love main characters who are genuine, hardworking, and a little vulnerable. And Sai fits that to a T, the main character Sai. She's a very good lead character, and yes, while it is absolutely a situation of, oh, here's a main character girl who's just a little different from other girls who are traditionally cute, and thinks she doesn't fit in and has a hopeless crush on the guy that all the girls like, that we've seen in a billion other shoujo anime. It is a tried and true formula for a reason because, again, here you immediately want to root for Sai, I think. Like, give this girl all the happiness. I don't need any. And then, you know, it's like, oh, Sai, actually, I like someone. Oh no, he likes someone who's not me. I guess I should give up on him. And then she eventually blurts out a confession, and it turns out they liked each other the whole time. Wow. Again, I've seen this before. But did I still get happy for them? Yes, I fucking did. Leave me alone. And actually, a lot of the mundane school days shenanigans in this are pretty fun compared to other high school shoujo anime. I just think that even the minor supporting characters are written with a good, upbeat sense of humor. And the rest of the class has a decently fun dynamic that helps carry this show through its romantic dead space. Like where there's no romance happening, I mean. So, absolutely fair play to this one. I did enjoy myself, and I was happy to see the romance work out in the end. So what else can you ask for, really? Next up is Yano-kun's Ordinary Days. Man, there are a lot of stupidly cute rom-coms this season. This might win the award for the most wholesome romance anime I've ever seen. The whole premise is that the main guy, Yano, is quote-unquote clumsy, but it's more like some kind of higher power has it out for the guy. He constantly injures himself by running face first into street poles, tripping over absolutely nothing into piles of splintered wood, or just getting stung repeatedly by an entire swarm of bees upon entering a 300-meter radius of a beehive. It's bad luck turned up beyond absurd, right? But that bad luck of his actually has a real effect on his life beyond just hurting him, because he ends up distancing himself from basically everyone, all of his classmates, out of fear of getting other people caught up in his bad luck. But the main girl, Yoshida, sees his constant misfortune on their first day in class together, and her inherently caring nature makes her immediately start wanting to help care for this guy. So their relationship sort of starts when Yoshida promises to treat Yano whenever he gets injured. And from there, Yano makes more friends with other students in class, does normal Japanese student things, yada yada. And the whole time, Yano and Yoshida are super charming and sweet in the way they treat each other and grow their relationship. Like they genuinely want nothing more than to just see each other, talk to each other, be around each other, even improve themselves for each other. All the while, they just have great communication where they're upfront and honest about how they feel for the most part. It is very sweet. And they do actually confess to each other about halfway through, so there's real progress here. There's some drama too, since there's this dude on the baseball team that actually has a thing for Yoshida as well, but it never gets too melodramatic with it, since he realizes that the main two like each other. And even though these characters, removed from the context of the show, are just indistinguishable from any other throwaway high school anime rom-com, they're all perfectly likable as they are, and the way the show presents them in context is just very charming on the simplest of levels. Like, no complaints here, this is super cute. If you like slice-of-life rom-com stuff, this is absolutely a big recommend from me. So, Mechanical Marie, another cute-ass rom-com, fuck! This is another that doesn't really have a lot to it, and that is strength. The whole premise is the love interest, the guy Arthur, is completely distrustful of real people since he's the heir to a big estate and or corporation, whatever it is, despite being an illegitimate child of his father. So he constantly has begrudging family members sending assassins after him day in and day out. And some of those assassins had weaved their way into his life only to deceive him later. So the solution to Arthur's rampant distrust becomes to hire this girl Marie, who is a former fighting MMA, some kind of fighting champion, and is pretty much unaffected by anything at this point, to pose as a robot maid for Arthur, even though she's a regular human. So under the impression that she's a robot, Arthur immediately lets his guard down around her, and their relationship grows from there, with all kinds of funny and ridiculous shenanigans involving frequent assassination attempts that Marie easily snuffs out, and her trying to play herself off as a robot. It's actually pretty funny. The AA battery bit in particular was a hit with me. This is very reminiscent of an Urusei Yatsura or a Ranma 1/2, in the way it's designed, with the constant shenanigans at every turn that are largely inconsequential, and also how most of the other notable characters outside of the main two are introduced basically solely with the intent to spice up the drama. But what's different from those here is that the main two's relationship is written more like a shoujo romance where they don't argue with each other pretty much at all, and we constantly see Marie doubting herself, thinking that since she's lying to Arthur about being a robot, she can't stay with him in the long run, and he'll come to hate her when he finds out that she's a human. I think the way everything plays out is sensible enough. I wouldn't say that it has a plot or a narrative per se, because it's structured more like a sitcom, and a lot of the individual events aren't really noteworthy. But I do think it is fun to watch as it goes on, which is really all I want out of a low-stakes rom-com like this. I think it's genuinely really cute and sweet. So yeah, nothing crazy here, but again, a plenty enjoyable rom-com offering. I think it nailed exactly what it was going for. Next up is Wandance. Yeah, that's right. The one with like an entire half of the Scatman music video in it. I mean, you know, the main character actually does have a stutter, a legitimate stutter, so makes sense. But yeah, this is a cute little show. I thought it was pretty good. Now, just to get it out of the way, the 3D models look kinda off. But if you told me they had actually mocapped, professional dancers for these animations, I would believe you. So while the 3D models themselves like awkwardly stand out from the 2D animation, the actual 3D animation itself is very smooth. The tie physics are really something. Ooh. And you know, far be it from me to criticize dancing. Like, it is a very free-form manner of self-expression. And fuck, all I can do is like the Angels of Delusion dance. And maybe the TikTok-length version of Bibbidi Ba on a good day. I have practiced the twisty steps, whatever they're called. I'm not very good at them. But basically, I'm unqualified to criticize people's dancing, but, you know. You're gonna have to try pretty hard to convince me that some of the dance moves in this weren't just dudes flailing around wildly. Now again, my worthless criticism aside here, this is a perfectly fine sports anime? Sports? Is it a sports anime? It sort of fits in with sports anime in the sense that the character sport, in this case, team/competitive dancing, is used as a medium for the show to help the characters grow and develop, learning more about themselves and about each other as it goes on. The story's pacing and escalation are just fine, not particularly compelling, but I do like how it does look at both team dancing with the club stuff and also dance battles, separate from the club stuff, because there are different rules and shit, right? So the first half being more about team dancing, while the second half focuses on dance battles, keeps it feeling more fresh than it would have if it had just stuck to one of those. And I think the kicker here is the very sweet relationship that blossoms between Kabo and Wanda. Wanda is like so kind and intuitive to the point that even when Kabo's stutter keeps him from getting his words out, she can sort of understand what he wants to say. They have a very sweet dynamic where they inspire each other and help each other improve at their dancing. The senpai dude gives the show a sort of interesting wrinkle, like the only other dude who was in the dance club at one point but is not in there anymore. You know, that guy. He gives the show an interesting wrinkle, and the club president girl as like a mentor figure while also being competitive in her own right works well too. So I find both of them add good substance to this show. So basically, this is pretty good. Nothing to sneeze at. It's definitely different as well. I mean, I've definitely never seen another anime in my life that focuses on hip-hop or freestyle dancing in a competitive context. So even if for that alone, I appreciate this one. And it is a dance anime, so there's no shortage of pretty girls with their tummies out. So you ain't gonna hear me complain. Next up is Inexpressive Kashiwada and Expressive Oota. Now, if you're someone who is used to the exaggerated ways that young anime and manga characters approach romance, or can look past the extreme tsundere boy and extreme kudere girl dynamic here, this is pretty cute. I did not enjoy this one. This is one of those that's made up of a lot of like mini situations that it constantly jumps between, a la Pseudo Harem or The Girl I Like Forgot Her Glasses from seasons gone by. The premise is a little strange, that being Oota trying anything he can think of to try to make Kashiwada react in some noticeable way, But the cast of characters are likable enough, I suppose. And the budding romance really isn't that bad. It doesn't really make that much sense, since anyway to Sunday, Oota's just constantly picking on Kashiwada, but they are middle school kids. Plus, Oota's friends do call him out for being mean and or weird. And Kashiwada, in her own way, mostly doesn't seem to mind. So, I guess it's fine. There is backstory from their nursery school days, where the main two first met, long before their middle school days, which the show covers. That explains why Kashiwada, even to this day, still has a thing for Oota. Meanwhile, he's just in chronic denial. But they do have some good moments throughout this. They go through all the slice of life school anime beats. Christmas, Valentine's Day, the beach festival, you name it. There's really not much important drama or any particular thing that takes very long at all. Like I said, it kind of jumps between scenarios multiple times within an episode. So it does feel fairly fast-paced, but yeah, nothing really of note here. Just a pretty decent little rom-com with a very, very polar opposites dynamic happening. It's not bad, but I think more casual viewers might find it difficult to stick with. Because it can be strange. Next up is Let's Play. This is a decent little shoujo reverse harem situation here. We've seen a lot of main characters in recent years in these kind of slice of life romance anime who struggle with some manner of disability beyond their control. Sam isn't even the only one in this roundup. Sam has asthma, on top of having a sheltered upbringing. So she has a very relatable level of social anxiety. But despite all that, she found something to be passionate about in the form of making games. She's just living a regular old life as a software engineer by day, World of Warcraft mage / game designer by night in California somewhere. So long story short, I like her. Honestly, most of the attempts at romance in this show are mediocre at best. Sam and Link have some cute moments, but honestly, this falls more into the weird character piece genre of slice of life anime as opposed to more romance focused. A lot of our named characters in this struggle with various strong emotions or just chronic feelings of some kind. Martial Law, the streamer guy in particular struggling with depression, is the one that this show spends a lot of time on. Like, his dad didn't love him and, he gave up on his dream of being an artist, the whole 9 yards. There are other things too, but between Sam's lack of self-confidence and Marshall's depression, those are the main two things this show spends a lot of time on. And I think it does a decent job with them. Because, the overall message you take from this one is, this is the story of Sam gaining confidence in herself through her life's various ups and downs. And, matters of romance are oftentimes matters of self-confidence and matters of self-image. So in that sense, I do think this show's good. But the journey it takes to get there feels very strange and all over the place most of the time. I do like how Marshall's replay of Sam's game Luminate sort of helps bring everything full circle in a way, but like I said, aside from that, there's a lot of different aspects of this show, even just when following Sam through the various parts of her life. Aspects that just don't connect at all to each other. And ironically, the least conspicuous scenes at the time, the ones Sam shares with Charles, the pretty blonde boy, are the ones that are actually contributing the most to Sam's story of gaining self-confidence. Which, looking back on it is fine, but they don't seem all that important when they're actually happening, which is weird. Anyway, this one's alright. Again, I don't put a lot of stock in the romance here, but otherwise, pretty fun, cute little show. It's at least decent. Next up is With You, Our Love Will Make It Through. This is basically that one book talk book about the girl who gets clapped by the bull with the 14-inch cock that everyone was making fun of for a while. What's it called? Milkman? Milkman! Not Milkman. But if it was an anime and not as obscene. This one, I think, pretty much accomplishes what it sets out to do. Interspecies romance, discrimination, the works. It doesn't really fall short anywhere, honestly, and I have to appreciate that it doesn't shy away from the idea that beast folk, or whatever, have more intense mating instincts. That becomes a pretty central point of conflict in this one. Not so much a point of conflict, more like I don't know, just something that gets talked about a lot. Like, I mean, I'm not gonna remember any of these characters after this, but like, I don't know. The love triangle didn't really bother me at all. In fact, I think the show handles it pretty well. It tries to do some small stuff here and there with some of the supporting characters that actually seems kind of meaningful. I mean, it really could have been a lot worse. And it's surprisingly sweet, even beyond just the main romance. Like, I find the little friendship between Mari and the cat girl really cute. And even the bromance going on between the brunette dude and Dogman is genuinely sweet. Like, nothing feels forced here. I don't have any major complaints to throw out. I don't have much outright praise. But again, if this kind of shoujo romance is your thing, where like the social odds are stacked against the two who are in love with each other and constantly breaking social barriers with the power of love, and with, you know, a not unreasonable amount of teen drama mixed in, and that touches at least a little bit on most of the typical school life anime beats like culture festivals, sports festivals, yada yada, this is absolutely not a miss. It's fundamentally sound. Also, I'm pretty sure Dogman has a massive cock. Not that I would know. Next up is Little Miss Vampire Can't Suck Right. This is super cute. This is one of those that's just no stakes, no drama, just cute, harmless fun that's just super wholesome the whole way through. This one's whole thing is that the main vampire girl has spent most of her school life playing up to the refined, dignified image that the general populace has of vampires, so not only does no one around her know her true self, but she also holds herself back from taking other people's blood because she knows she's not as adept at it as a vampire should be. So TLDR, she's felt super lonely and doesn't have anyone she can truly call a friend. So when she meets this main guy by chance and opens up to him about her insecurity, about sucking blood, and shows him her true self, his sort of more patient, understanding nature comes to the fore, and he basically lets her trial and error on him to figure out how to improve her blood-sucking technique, I guess. So it becomes this very wholesome and sweet relationship where the guy finds the girl's true personality behind the facade extremely charming and cute, and it is that. But the dude here is your typical anime mob character who's a loner and also doesn't have any real friends and is the, oh, hanging out with me must be a bother type. We love those guys, don't we? But even as the main vampire girl gets more friends beyond the main dude, the relationships they have are very similar to the primary relationship in the sense that everyone just falls head over heels for how endearing she really is behind the facade. And, you know, from there, the spirit of youth, seishun da ne, as anime characters would say, unfolds from there. No harm done here, super cute the whole way through, no complaints. In fact, I even think the way it culminates with the main character's birthday, where he meets the vampire girl's family, shows how both him and her have grown as characters since the start. So, absolutely fair play. To have a show like this with no pointless drama and still have characters worth at least giving one fuck about is no small feat. And that brings to an end my slice of life block. Now welcome to the Isekai / fantasy block. Yay! Next up is Hero Without a Class. Who even needs skills? This is more enjoyable than a lot of other shows in this sort of guy rejected by the world's ability system becomes overpowered genre of anime. I know I classify anime genres very specifically, but trust me, there are enough to consider this a genre. This one is surprisingly witty in its sense of humor, and actually a lot of what it does throughout feels relatively meaningful, which is a whole lot more than I can say for a lot of other shows like this in this genre. The only weird thing is that it kind of feels like the first half of this one should have been the second half, and vice versa, because, you know, this one's split down the middle, where the main character spends the first half of the show mastering his physical abilities, sword fighting, yada yada, and the second half mastering his magical abilities. But the stuff that goes down at the magic school actually feels mostly pretty boring and mundane compared to what happens in the first half, which makes this one feel a little bizarrely paced. The supporting main characters in the first half even have some amount of history or backstory that somehow plays into the main character or his family and the story that ultimately ends up unfolding within the first half, whereas the supporting main characters in the second half are just random children. But the thing about this show that I think makes it better than its peers, it's that the main character guy, instead of just sitting around dealing with worthless politics, getting involved with random women, or just ending up dealing with pointless side quests, he actually just goes out and accomplishes things with his overpowered abilities, and does it constantly. So the show feels like it keeps moving along at a good pace, and the plots of both the first half and the second half, while they are like separate from each other, they do, in their own right, escalate into proper story arcs that culminate with some pretty high stakes that, you know, at least theoretically have wide-ranging consequences for this world, for this setting, even if we'll never actually see any of those consequences unfold in the anime itself. But yeah, the show does feel like it treats the climaxes, the two climaxes, like big deals, even if the main character doesn't. He just kind of handles them nice and easy. And even the reason why the main character is overpowered despite being classless feels fairly justified. Even if it's a bit silly, you know, he puts in the time. So, but yeah, I would call this one enjoyable for sure. Like, not bad at all. Perfectly acceptable power fantasy. I won't watch it again. But yeah. Enjoyable. Yes. Dad is a hero, Mom is a spirit, and I'm a Reincarnator. This is perfectly fine. Not particularly gripping or compelling from a plot perspective, but for what it is, it does offer a semi-interesting look into this fantasy kingdom dealing with its own issues. And, you know, how a spirit girl who was isekai'd into this world after being a scientist on Earth came to use her very unique set of skills and knowledge to affect this world dramatically, this new isekai. All that while having a pretty good sense of humor, halfway decent character work, and well-paced story development. It's the type of show that's pretty mundane in what actually happens, but it's fundamentally well-built from a world-building and narrative perspective. The only thing that I want to criticize that I think was missing from this was a reunion with the cousin, the brunette daughter. I wrote her name down, Raphelia, Ellen's cousin, right? Raphelia, for like the whole show, she was given the short end of the stick so much. Like, she's just a regular child. She's not a spirit with any fucking crazy abilities. She doesn't have memories from a previous life. She's just a normal child. All she wanted was to be happy. She wanted an easygoing life with her mother in her life and didn't ask for any of the BS she ended up getting, right? You know, like, Raphelia's mom, like, she ended up getting greedy and she paid for it, right? But the daughter? The daughter got ignored by her dad, mistreated by her mom, given strict aristocrat training she didn't ask for, and was even fucking kidnapped at one point. All the while hearing about how Ellen, you know, the main character Ellen, the spirit daughter, is this amazing miracle child. So of course she's feeling, like, bitter. Of course she is. Like, not a single person in that noble household gave Raphelia the time of day. It sucks, man. Like, she had no proper resolution with her father, even after he rescued her from being kidnapped. All he could do was be like, well, I don't know how to talk to her, which is like the most basic ass father complaint of all time. And the last scene she was even in the whole show was her talking about how her tits are bigger than Ellen's. Like, that doesn't sit right with me, you know? Maybe they come to an understanding in the light novels or whatever. I don't know. I wanted something in this because she was treated like shit for the entire show and she did nothing wrong. But yeah, other than that, this is perfectly fine. Nothing to write home about, but there's plenty of depth between the various characters. The princes come to mind. There's, you know, some nuance there. A lot of the plot, like the story that's ultimately told, comes down to Ellen's ability to create basically life-saving medicine and the kingdom trying to get their hands on it. Whereas this is like, you know, fucking game-changing medicine. So there's this whole plot going on behind the scenes, yada yada. But it does make for a fairly interesting, albeit mundane, story that they're telling. So There's some decent world building with some backstory that helps explain why things are the way they are in this setting, in this world. And the family dynamic between Ellen and her parents is genuinely sweet, so really not bad at all. I thought it was pretty good. Okay, pretty decent, somewhere in there. Next up is a wild last boss appeared. This is a perfectly enjoyable isekai show. I mean, it suffers from the same, these 12 episodes only cover 1/6 of the entire plot, so it's kind of unsatisfying from a narrative point of view, but for what it is, no major complaints, really. Like, the fight scenes in this are actually pretty damn good, too. I do appreciate when an isekai takes the time to have the main character consider the context of the new world they enter into, and if there could be other isekai folks out there, you know? This character, who he made and he played as, that he now inhabits, has memories that he doesn't know about, that he never created as part of her character when she was just a character in the game. So it adds an element of unease and mystery behind everything, which is good. And we do actually eventually learn why that is. Again, good stuff. The main plot is nothing to write home about, but the world building is decent. It's all easy to wrap your head around. What with the devil race or whatever, who started their conquest in this world upon Lufus's initial defeat. And Venus adds a little wrinkle into everything, although it's one of those that seems like it should be more consequential, but ultimately doesn't amount to much. You know, like maybe her betrayal could have been a little bit more of a bigger deal. Like, you know, she defects, but is won back over as like the last thing that happens in this season, instead of it all being over within the span of one episode. It wasn't bad or anything. I definitely think you could have seen it coming if you had paid more attention. I wasn't. So, anyway, this one's pretty decent. Next up is My Gift, level 9,999, unlimited gacha, backstabbed in a backwater dungeon. Somehow not the most ridiculous title for a show I've covered on these roundups. This is pretty fun, kind of. This reminds me of the my instant death skill is overpowered or whatever from a while back, with how much rampant death there is. Although it's a lot more gruesome this time. The actual deaths, that is. But I actually find this one to be a lot more easily stomached than that one. This feels very much like a sort of extreme on both ends of the spectrum of what isekai anime have become at this point in our history, right? On one end, you have this super over-the-top, edgy revenge plotline that doesn't just fall through because the main character is actually a super nice guy or whatever. No, he and his pals actually do pretty brutally kill the party members who betrayed him one by one. And the way they do it maximizes the fear and anguish that the party members feel to give that satisfying feeling of the cocky bastards who betrayed him now begging for mercy before dying anyway. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you have all these like silly maid characters and other fantasy archetypes taking up space that really want nothing more than to sniff the main character's feet, lick his feet, kiss his feet. You know, not an exaggeration, by the way. That's for real. But on the whole, I do think this is pretty enjoyable for what it is. The setting's decent, and there's actually more substance to it than I would have imagined going in. The whole maestro thing gives this show an air of mystery and intrigue that hangs over it as it goes on. And stuff like the couple episodes that features the like party of kiddos adventuring in the dungeon actually gives us not only a better sense of the world, but also a break from the revenge storyline while still giving us something of substance that eventually plays into the revenge storyline. It's really not bad. And even to add on to that, although it was a bit excessive, the divide and conquer little shebang with the elves at the end was actually like proper good fun. Like lots of fights featuring these quirky characters we hadn't seen much of before that point. Like really enjoyable stuff. And beyond that, the fight scenes in this absolutely do not slack at all. Like the animation is a solid like 7 or 8 out of 10 for the most of the fight scenes. Like it's no Jujutsu Kaisen or My Hero Academia, but by God have I seen a lot worse. Like there's plenty of motion, dynamic camera angles, flashy magic. It's deceptively strong for a show that seems like a dumb isekai on the surface. Well, it is a dumb isekai, but you get the point. The banished court magician aims to become the strongest. This is pretty fun, actually. Again, this falls squarely into an existing subgenre of fantasy anime, that being main character is banished from a prominent position, then forms an adventurer party with some other misfits. And the main character is ridiculously overpowered, but somehow his former boss is never realized, etc. Except this time, the members of the main character Alec's party that he forms is actually a reformation. They were actually members of his party from before he became a court magician. So they immediately have a fun vibe going right from the start, which is nice, because they already know each other. And from time to time in this show, we see their backstory from when they were in school together, which helps us get an understanding of how they got here, both in terms of their relationship as like a party and as characters themselves individually. There are even some halfway decent characters outside of the main four, namely the swordswoman, whose backstory gets explored a bit towards the end. Mostly just her, but you get the point. It's got pretty good characters, which is half the battle. So, and actually as this one goes on, it's mostly fighting all throughout, like, with maybe a few minor exceptions. It's mostly fighting all throughout, with maybe a few minor exceptions. I'd say like at least 3/4 of the show is just fighting in a dungeon somewhere, which actually makes the pacing feel really good, because nothing drags on for too long, and the adventurer party is constantly at odds with some threat or another. And the stakes really do escalate as it chugs along. It just feels nice to follow along with. And even within the first half of the show, the prince, who Alec supported as a court magician, who is now useless without Alec's support magic, makes a reappearance, and the two sort of clear the air. The prince and Alec clear the air, and the prince just never comes back. So not leaving that unresolved tension hanging over the show the whole time is a big win in my book. My biggest gripe with this show is that in the last handful of episodes, while they're dealing with the Blade Master or whatever, it drops a lot of lore mysteries, and actually does a lot to tease what these characters are going to be getting into in the light novels going forward. So it sucks that we'll never see any of that in the anime, since they do spend a good amount of time talking about stuff like the Seekers, Eden, all that malarkey, in like the last 2 episodes or so. It even teases a tournament arc that we're never gonna get to see in the anime. Boo. But yeah, there's really not a whole lot to this other than the fighting. There's a very mild romance angle between Alec and the red-haired girl, Yorha, I think, which is not bad. Doesn't take away from anything. Nothing to complain about. The plot overall is kept fairly simple. The characters are fun to watch, and the fighting is pretty engaging for what it is. Pretty strong visually as well. This show always keeps the characters on their toes, so it never feels too stale or like it's dragging on pointlessly. Not the greatest thing I've ever seen overall, but also it's fundamentally sound in pretty much all aspects. I definitely recommend it if it seems interesting. I'm almost inclined to read the light novels. Next up is Pass the Monster Meat, Milady. I don't know who came up with that one. This is basically Delicious in Dungeon if it was a shoujo. And actually just really cute and wholesome and not a little fucked up. This show very much lands in the same way that My Awkward Senpai does, in the sense that Melfi, the main character, is a little bit eccentric, but she's super earnest and kind, and really loves what she does, so you want to root for her immediately. I think she does a great job as this show's lead. Despite all the rampant rumors about how eccentric she is for eating monster meat, she sticks to it and has a strong backstory that perfectly explains away that whole situation and how it plays into her attachment to her mother and what she's researching. And actually, the romance between Melfi and the scary Duke's son is really sweet, like disgustingly sweet. So this one just has a really good cozy fantasy vibe going on. And actually it does spend some time sort of detailing how they go about preparing the monster meat in question. But it never takes too long or drags itself out, so it ends up giving good context for how the otherwise seemingly disgusting meat ends up really tasty for all these army men that Melfi ends up feeding. The actual plot, beat by beat, is nothing to write home about. In fact, there's a bit about how Melfi's magic is mostly self-taught using books and her mother's research that she's carrying on, but she's actually super gifted with magic that never gets followed up on. And really, the plot itself isn't worth going over at all. That said, both Melfi and the Duke's son have backstory that shows how they ended up how they are, and they connect on a really good level, especially because we learn that the son has the same problem of magic overloading that caused Melfi's mother to pass away. So that gives Melfi even more motivation to carry on her research of extracting magic from things, which is how she makes monster meat edible in the first place without making everyone sick. So yeah, just a really warm, cozy fantasy vibe with this one, and Melfi is such an intrinsically sweet girl that guides us through the course of the show. No notes. Cute as hell. The dark history of the reincarnated Villainess. This is another Villainess anime that's sort of an amalgamation of certain aspects of other Villainess anime we've already seen, which, in reality, is everything creative at this point in time. Anything you can possibly create is an amalgamation of stuff that already exists. So, fine. Anyway, this is really not bad at all. It's unremarkable, but I do find the main character charming. She's this girl who wrote the story of the fantasy world she's isekai'd into, where she, in her younger days, she self-inserted herself as the beautiful heroine surrounded by hot guys, but instead, when she gets isekai'd, she gets put into the body of the heroine's sister, who's the Villainess, and is the one trying to kill the heroine in the original draft of the story that, she wrote in her previous life. And as it goes on, we learn how various stages of her previous life on Earth shaped the fantasies she ended up shoehorning into this fantasy world she created, which is pretty cute and fun to watch. And after being reincarnated as the Villainess sister character, she's constantly panicking, trying to figure out how to avoid all the death flags and stuff. And the voice actress, Aoyama Yoshino, really sells that panic in a funny way with her delivery, as expected of her. I swear I looked that up and I had the biggest fucking eureka moment, like, oh, of course it is. If you can voice Bocchi, you can voice anybody. Really. But yeah, the main character, Ayana, I think is her name, she's a little clumsy and awkward too, as she tries to figure out the best way to navigate through everything. So watching her interact with the world that she's so familiar with, yet she can't quite predict in this new real-life way she's experiencing it, makes this pretty fun to watch as it goes on. The romance is, like a lot of other shoujo / villainous anime, a little on and off and a little strangely executed. And there's always a few potential romantic options at play, but again, it's not bad. And I don't find the characters particularly boring or anything, and it chugs along at a decent pace. The world building isn't bad, and the climax arc is sort of halfway interesting as well. With all that, plus a pretty witty, fast-paced sense of humor, I think this is a perfectly acceptable Villainous isekai offering. Next up is a Gatherer's Adventure in Isekai. This is actually an above-average meandering fantasy isekai. There's some halfway worthwhile stuff here. It's the same formula we've seen a million times, right? Where you have the salaryman bored out of his mind on Earth gets reincarnated as an overpowered dude in a fantasy world where, doing the most mundane shit makes him super strong or whatever without him realizing. And everyone's like, whoa, who are you? You get it. And then he gathers up a group of misfits to go on adventures with. There's a cute little mascot in there, yada yada. But this one also has, story arcs throughout, which is a nice change of pace for a show like this. Most notably, the arc with the noble mom, who is poisoned by some black market dudes who were, racketeering, basically, running some wild economic scheme trying to drive up the prices of a poison on the black market. And then the last arc, where the band of misfits, our merry band of misfits, deal with the high elves and their stifling traditions and trying to find the blonde elf's sister who'd been missing, which we'd heard a little bit about when the blonde elf was first introduced. Both of those arcs really aren't bad. They're not interesting enough for me to elaborate on them any further, but they are halfway decent for what they are, and for what this show is. And the characters really aren't that bad either. There are some other points of potential intrigue here as well, like with the seemingly limitless potential of the main character's magic abilities. He can transform the lizard man into a dragon or whatever. I forget. Other than that, this has a lot of the standard elements you'd expect from a meandering isekai like this. Nothing really worth noting, but again, this definitely has more to offer than a standard issue meandering isekai. So for that, this one gets a relatively unenthusiastic thumbs up from me. Okay. Dusk beyond the end of the world. I'm gonna say it again. How many times am I gonna sit here and talk about an original anime that seemed like it had a lot of potential at the start, only for it to flop spectacularly? It keeps happening. I'm tired of it. Now, from the beginning of this, honest to God, it feels like a video game. The way it progresses, the post-apocalyptic setting, the adventure aspect of it, the very mysterious enemy organization, and the quirky enemies who constantly appear from it, even the dialogue and the android versus human theme it pushes sometimes, plus the lingering mystery over the story, wondering what happened to Toasa. It's built like something between a visual novel and a JRPG, which I actually think is pretty cool. But then it gets past episode 2. I can't believe this, bro! How many times is this gonna happen? I'm so sick of it. It definitely felt like there was a lot of potential at the start when I was looking forward to what it could be. But the stuff after episode 2 it's fine. But by God, does a lot of it feel just completely unimportant. And even some of what I just mentioned ends up kind of becoming negatives for this show by the end of it. Like, this one doesn't really stick to its themes that much. It kind of which ends up blurring the message that it's trying to send. The confrontation with those quirky enemies from the organization end up becoming maybe 1 or 2 time encounters that end abruptly, and those quirky characters never come back. Those quirky antagonists just disappear, so they ultimately feel meaningless. Or maybe they come back in like a cameo scene at the very end. It also doesn't spend a lot of time with those quirky characters, so we don't know anything about them. Like, those antagonists, they're just weird for the sake of being weird. And this one chooses over and over to disregard the overarching mystery with Toasa, to dive into weird, awkward subplots that don't contribute anything to the story. And even when they do try to find clues to the lore of like what happened and how did they end up in this post-apocalyptic world, what was the apocalypse actually like, what happened in the apocalypse, they usually end up with nothing significant to show for it. And it takes weird detours on its way there. Plus, I find it hard to fully justify having a mystery like that hanging over the show like this when one of the main characters knows everything and just refuses to talk about it for no real reason. Now, I mentioned weird, awkward subplots. Let me give you an example. There's an entire tangent that crosses over between episodes, multiple episodes, about helping some dad that the main 3 meet on a train somewhere, where he wants to reconcile with his wife who's pissed at him for cheating. And for cheating like, I don't know, 20 years ago. And actually around that point where they're dealing with the guy on the train and the family on the train is when the show actually starts addressing Toasa's disappearance for real. And also, while that's all happening, they're also addressing the third wheel of the squad, Amuro's mixed feelings about the main characters, because there's this weird new form of marriage. It's basically diet marriage you can have between anybody, just like a commitment to spend your life together, I guess, not a commitment to one person necessarily. And she has mixed feelings because the sort of main 2, Akira and Yugure, are having this weird pseudo-romance where they're going to get regular married, which, you know, at this point is all but a relic of ancient history, like 200 years in the future, 200 some odd years in the future. Meanwhile, Amuro wants to get new form of marriage, L-sheet or whatever the fuck, with all 3 of them. But the other 2 don't agree with her. And, you know, at least the angle with Amuro's sort of pent-up frustration does play into everything by the end, but in the moment, it feels really weird. But then it also has this big fucking world-shattering reveal moment right after that train subplot that comes out of a fight between Yugure and one of her sister unit robots. And the motivations behind that fight make sense, but they don't really feel important because the show spent hardly any time making their motivations feel important. Literally, that sister robot that Yugure is fighting had like a few less than 30-second throwaway scenes of her like drunk rambling at a bar while they were on the train. And after this, along with the big earth-shattering reveal, they drop the entire lore, everything about the AI war, the apocalypse essentially, all at once. We know how I feel about that. Here's the thing. The episode 0 of this show kind of makes it out to be a show sort of on the same track as a Nier Automata, right? Where it seems to want to explore the ethics of human versus AI android treatment, how AI could end up integrated into society in our future, that kind of thing. And, the episode 0 starts out like 2039, and a lot of how it depicts society at that point actually seems like it could be pretty realistic. That kind of thing. But it pivots when the main show starts, after episode 0, into that weird JRPG type thing, post-apocalyptic stuff that I mentioned before. If it had just been that one major pivot, and it pivoted from being, it seeming like it was going to be more about exploring, themes of AI, potential AI conflict, into a post-apocalyptic show where AI caused the apocalypse, and it had been done well, as it went on, and the story had been executed well, and, it had told a worthwhile narrative after pivoting, that would have been fine. I would have been totally okay with it. But it's that it pivots and then blows it. The pacing is weird, a lot of the subplots are pointless, and it just fails to capitalize on its potential. Here we go. And also, the main character, Akira, is completely unremarkable in every way. Even Toasa in episode 0, where we're introduced to her, and then, she ends up disappearing by the time the post-apocalyptic stuff starts. She's just this genius AI girl, genius AI programmer, whatever, who, as we learn later on, she has massive ambitions to basically take the fate of the world into her hands, but we have no idea why she would even want to do that in the first place. Why would she go so far? She doesn't have some tragic backstory or anything that motivates her to go that far. So, and then we learn when all the lore is getting dropped on us, she had this big plan to artificially upgrade humanity using new tech so that the integration of artificial intelligence beings into society would feel less alien. But why? I'm not about to dive into the whole apocalypse lore or anything like that, but while I do think the lore of the apocalypse, what actually happens, does explain why the post-apocalyptic world is the way it is, I really don't like everything getting dropped at once, and Toasa's story, when it does get revealed, doesn't really feel important upon its reveal, because the show failed up to that point to explore any truly meaningful aspects of the post-apocalyptic world and how Toasa's influence shaped it into how it is by this point. So it doesn't even feel important. I don't understand why she did what she did, why she would go that far, why she has this big fucking plan to turn humans into part robots, and her upgrade plan backfired. You can hypnotize upgraded people, not much of an upgrade if you ask me. And by God, the climax of this show is weird. I won't get too into it, but after the big lore dump, it tries to bring a lot of stuff full circle in basically an episode and a half. The guy who ends up being the final antagonist gets beaten in no time flat by an otherwise completely unnoteworthy supporting character. And it's another one of the sister androids to Yugure. And they actually merge Amaru's consciousness with the sister unit that Yugure fought with previously, that ended up leading to the big lore drop. So while Yugure is fighting the sister unit is literally flip-flopping back and forth between Amaru's personality and the robot's personality. So Yugure is confronting both of their grievances at once, flip-flopping back and forth, literally, constantly flip-flopping back and forth, which really makes it feel like they were short on time. It's all rushed and it all feels anticlimactic. And the way the show ultimately ends, the what did we learn from all this moral of the story, feels completely unapplicable to today's society if it's not about polyamory. Or maybe it's supposed to be times change, so change with the times or some bullshit. I don't fucking know. And look, right, the show is not bad. It's okay. A lot of the fight scenes are really impressive. Visuals are great in general. Even the subplots themselves, they're not bad. I just think they're not what this show should have been doing with only 12 episodes to play with. And the lore about the apocalypse and the AI war that breaks out, it's sort of interesting, kind of. I just don't think it does enough to explain why characters, mainly Toasa, did what she did. Like, she ends up taking on so much responsibility. Like, in episode 0, she already has, like, an unbelievable amount of influence, and she's 18 years old. Yeah, and, you know, we see, like, what she does as she gets older and stuff, when the big lore drop. What motivated her to come up with this human upgrade plan at age, like, 18 or 19 or whatever? My god, it's fucking weird. Like, that's a massive, huge... You're trying to inject fucking futuristic tech into 8 billion people. Why? I don't get it. And you know, I mentioned earlier this show doesn't stick to themes, but it does stick to one theme. And that is how real or not feelings of love harbored by androids are, whether they're towards humans or other androids. But the characters don't do anything for me. So in conclusion, and it's the same as my conclusions about a lot of other original anime I've covered in these roundups, I wish this one was better, and I don't think there are a whole lot of excuses for it not being better. Alright, this will be a brief one, I just want to touch on it since it's canon. Chainsaw Man, Reze Arc. I'm sure I don't need to tell you how fucking awesome this was. It's mind-blowingly good. I'm starting to believe anime movies are the superior format, especially as like sequels. Because between this and the first, Infinity Castle Demon Slayer movie, fucking hell. With sequels to previously aired seasons, we don't have to introduce the characters. You know, we already know the situation and the characters going in, so we can just get right into it. And, you know, granted, the Reze Arc is perfect for a movie, but still, my god, this was awesome. I've talked about it before, this kind of thing where adaptations completely elevate the source material, the manga, but this felt like a whole nother level. It felt like a full creative transformation. Like, I actually can't believe they brought so much creative animation together and turned the Reze Arc into this movie. Like, the fighting between Denji and Reze spans practically the entire second half of the movie, and just goes on and gets better and better. Like, by the climax of the fighting, I'm sitting there in complete disbelief at what I'm seeing. You know, that's Mappa for you. Like, when they cook. By God. Like, I don't want to touch too much on the actual, like, plot of Chainsaw Man. Like, I think it's to each their own, right? I would take the Demon Slayer movie, the Infinity Castle movie, over this, probably. Just because I got more out of it personally. But this is still unbelievable. And I think if you are someone who really likes Chainsaw Man, my god, this is unbeatable, you know? And of course, worth mentioning as well, Reina Ueda as Reze is amazing. Like, her delivery is gentle, seductive, but also bone-chillingly eerie, while still sounding alluring. She's amazing. Yeah, this is one of those that's so obviously good, I don't feel like I need to talk much about it, so I'm not gonna waste any more time. Moving on. Next up is Ranma 1/2 reboot, season 2. Is it season 2 or part 2? Doesn't matter. This feels even more off the wall than season 1 did. You know, just throwing in weird random shit for the sake of it. And that's not I don't mean that as a criticism in this case, because that's the whole point. You know, it's goofy, it's silly. And, you know, maybe because we're already balls deep at this point, we're just throwing whatever at the wall to see what sticks. Now, you know, I do think some angles are funnier than others, but for the most part, this is just so much fun. It's still so much fun. And again, the animation in this reboot absolutely does not slack off. It really adds to how enjoyable this show is as like a watching experience. And I said it last time, I'll say it again, I really like what Ranma and Akane have going on as like a romance, as like a budding romance. Like, yeah, it's definitely needlessly contentious at times between them, but one, that's the point. And two, they always pretty quickly come back around to supporting each other, even if they make it seem like it's reluctant. And I actually like most of the other characters and how they play into driving the show into its signature mayhem. You know, nothing in particular in this season to point out, really. I just really get a kick out of this show. It's a lot of fun. So, next up is Let This Grieving Soul Retire, Part 2. Now, those of you who saw my roundup around this time last year, or about a month ago, in January of 2025, know that I'm not exactly fond of this show. if I had to explain why that is using as concise an example as possible, aside from just, it having no substance, comedic or otherwise, there's a scene in the second episode of this part where Thighs, what's her name? Tino. She dives into this ruin or whatever to try and find treasure or what have you, something or other. And he doesn't go into the ruin with her at all. He just lets her go in by herself and does nothing to help her. And a few minutes after she goes in by herself, she runs out of the ruin, being chased by a giant monster. And she's crying out for help, like, save me, Cry-sama, or whatever it is she says. And Cry just stands there, like, shit, here we go again. That's basically what it boils down to. And that's like, takes like 15 seconds. So we see 15 more seconds of her in the distance being chased by a monster. Meanwhile, Cry does absolutely nothing to help her. And, I will scream this from the rooftops, man. Give me Asta and his loudmouth ass a million times over instead of this crap. Like, at least Asta takes action. Like, I know the whole joke here is that Cry is actually not that strong, and he doesn't take action, and the reputation that he's built up in this fantasy society is primarily built upon him bluffing, but that's why it's bad. That's why I don't like it. The concept itself, I don't like. I think it'd be one thing if this show presented itself as like a Looney Tunes or a Tom and Jerry situation where that kind of thing happens constantly, and the comedically exaggerated threats don't actually end up affecting any of the main characters and are just there solely for comedic effect. But literally, the first episode of this part, the episode before where that scene I just mentioned is, the show literally tells us the backstory behind why Tino basically worships Cry the way she does, which involves her almost getting caught in a human trafficking operation. That's not a ha-ha funny kind of situation. To me, it just completely fails to grasp any good sense of balance between the two main aspects of what it's trying to push to the viewers. On one side, the more serious Adventurers Guild-based fantasy world, and on the other, the quote-unquote knee-slapping comedy bits where Cry just looks like a bitch and or an idiot. It fails to balance those two sides of the spectrum of what it's trying to do here. You'd think you'd have a character that's worth a damn heading this whole operation up. But Cry, it's not that he does nothing for me, because in fact he pushes me well into the negatives about him. I don't like him at all. I just don't see why I should like or care about him in any way. I get that his general incompetence and lack of motivation is what's supposed to be funny. And the incompetence is one thing. But what I don't like is that Cry doesn't even try. If he tried and failed, that might be funny. But he never even gives a shit about what's going on around him. And what's going on around him is the entire plot of the show. Which is maybe important? Maybe not? Cry doesn't seem to think so. So he just writes off the plot of his own show as meaningless garbage, because he never pays attention to anything. And it's not like they're not trying to push a plot, because they do have situations, overarching stories, character betrayals, like underground operations. There's stuff happening around him, but Cry never cares. So the mixture of elements just doesn't work at all, in my opinion. And by the way, when it does actually try to do things around Cry that he doesn't care about, it's all dumb anyway. Like, nothing matters, and because Cry never cares, it can't build any worthwhile stakes or drama, and maybe it isn't trying to, but it's not trying to. It is trying something. If it wanted to just be funny, it could have just done nothing. It could have not tried to build the plot, but it did try to build a plot. No other characters feel like they matter whatsoever. Even the ones that were in Cry's famous party back in the day that come back in the present. And even Tino is just fan service. I think some of the more like one-off, smaller comedy bits can land, but every character has like the one quirky thing about them that just gets recycled over and over as if the show expects the same bad jokes to keep being funny when they weren't funny in the first place. Although one thing I'll give the show that I criticized it for last season, the stupid mask that I mentioned when I covered the first part of this that did nothing, and ultimately ended up being a fucking joke, and not a good one, and not a funny joke, or just a dumb fucking worthless piece of shit. actually did end up doing something in this part. It became a stupid Deus Ex Machina power-up for Tino, which she used maybe once or twice. And we didn't even see the fight that followed after she powered up with the mask, because she ended up losing. But at least the mask did something. It didn't do nothing. That is better than I gave the show credit for last time. But it still ended up accomplishing nothing in the end. And you know, the more I talk about this, the more I realize that all of my criticisms are probably a personal taste thing, and I really try not to let my personal taste affect my criticisms of anime too much. Because I think I might know people who might actually find this style of humor funny, where just everything is a letdown and that's the joke. But it's not for me. Like, you know, they purposely build up something only for it to be worthless, and that's the joke. I feel like I know people who might find that funny, but I think it's dumb. In a bad way. I feel like it wasted my time. There. Next up is Tales of Wedding Rings Season 2. Wow, of all shows to come back. This one. Okay. This is still okay. The production feels better than Season 1. You know, the animation is strong in some places. So someone, somewhere who was in a position of authority over the creation of this really is a fan of this show, of this series. That's good. This season starts by delving into the backstory behind the prophecy or whatever that's been propelling this plot and the world and all this stuff since the start. But it's the most, like, contrived bullshit you've ever seen. Like, everything about the backstory screams, this is the very specific scenario I created to match what I wanted this anime to be. Like, even down to the point where the original Ring King, who is, at this point of where the story's at in the show, is trying to take over the main character's body through the rings. His dying words, which we see in the backstory, might as well have been, I hereby place a curse on the world such that the next young man to cross over from Japan with a big titty blonde girl by his side shall take 5 wives and become the next Ring King. It's very self-serving. You know, not really bad per se, because it does prop up what we know exists in this show already. It does explain it away, but I just struggle to take this one seriously. And it seems like it's taking itself seriously, at least somewhat, but I don't know why it even bothers. Like, even if you, as the author of the story, try to cook up some meaningful narrative for the 0.1% of people who actually care enough to split their brain power between both the naked women and the actual plot of this show, serving this half-baked BS almost makes that seem pointless anyway. Like, why even bother? Like, you absolutely can have a good, strong narrative and also lots of anime tits, but this is not it. And even the plot as it actually unfolds in the present time is full of nothing burger plot points. There's a point where Hime, the blonde, big titty blonde girl, is deceived by a messenger of the void or whatever during her training arc. The messenger takes the form of like her mom, and Hime gets taken over by that dark power for a bit. But that new version of her only lasts for maybe half an episode before the main character snaps her out of it with a pretty lame lecture. And that whole angle, it just ends up serving as nothing but the lead-in, like the dramatic lead-in to them shakalaka boom booming for the first time. And then later on, it's like, oh, here's some world building that doesn't really matter. Here's a talking statue that gives you a Deus Ex Machina that'll be useful later on, etc., etc. The climax of this is a letdown too. In the setup of the final conflict, it sets up the face-offs between each of the main characters' wives, like the 5 wives. There's a one-on-one being set up for each one of the 5 wives. They're facing off against illusions of the previous Ring King's 5 wives. Because the Ring King takes a wife from each race, so each of the main characters, current Ring King's wives, face off against illusions against the corresponding previous Ring King wife, But none of those one-on-ones get resolved, since the illusions just end up going poof away, and the wives just end up not having big defining moments individually. And even the main character's battle with the Abyss King is pretty much no action and all idealistic bullshit. The new Ring King will meet the same fate as the previous one. Loneliness. No! I love all my wives, but specifically the blonde one and her pussy. I'll never meet that fate. And then everything's ultimately resolved when Hime crosses into the abyss with the power of love, pulls Haruto out, and then they win with one shot and the power of love or whatever. One thing I will give this show is that it doesn't do nothing with its characters. Each of the 5 girls has stuff that they struggle with and strive to overcome. They've all got some decent character growth for what this show is, a trash harem fantasy thing. This is not nothing. They have stuff they struggle with and strive to overcome, and I find them reasonably worthwhile to watch as a group. Plus, they all have distinct motivations for following the main character and getting married to him, and it's not just blind devotion or plain old having a crush for every one of them. And the sense of humor, which doesn't quite seem self-aware to me, is still alright in places. So, it's not horrendous by any means, but it does feel like it's trying to force through this pretty subpar dramatic plot just to justify how much titty there is, which it really doesn't need to do. It's anime. Anime titties are expected of the experience. You can just include them. You don't have to justify it. In case you're wondering, this is the very important story reason why they're all naked. Fucking cares, man. They're naked. Great. I don't care. Fuck. Alright, Spy Family, Season 3. This is a record-breaking appearance for Spy Family 4 times. It's appeared on my roundups now. I have covered it since Season 1. What the fuck you want me to say, man? Spy Family's fucking good. The addition of Melinda is such an obvious thing, but the way the show presents it makes it feel like the most, oh fuck, holy shit thing that's ever happened in Spy Family. And I think that's because this is one of the few shows out there that comes back regularly that just lets you completely shut off your brain and enjoy it for how silly it is. And this one, I feel like perfectly balances how silly it is with the drama at play, because even though there is drama, a lot of it is pretty low stakes, all things considered. Now, that's not saying there are no high stakes drama, because my god, there is. The bus jacking happens in this one. But again, it even manages to spin the bus jacking into kind of this goofy little situation where Anya is trying to get a read on the whole situation around her and doesn't understand anything because she's 5 years old. So when the story does take more dramatic turns, it actually kind of throws you. Even if it's the most obvious thing, like the introduction of Melinda. And, even what happens with Melinda as it goes on is just weird, She thinks her husband's an alien. Another thing worth noting, Lloyd's backstory. We get Lloyd's backstory in this season, which is solid, I think. Nothing mind-blowing, but it absolutely does the job and provides us with long-awaited insight into how Lloyd was as a kid and what led him to being a spy. I mentioned the bus jacking already. I think it's a surprisingly big event for this point in Spy Family, where it could probably just get away with a bunch of episodic nonsense. So the bus jacking actually really does help. So the bus jacking, even for how kind of a small scale event of terrorism it is, it does help increase our understanding of the world around them and show us as the viewers more ways that the tension between the East and West has started to boil over, even on this smaller scale where the, a ragtag group of wackos are committing terrorism. But again, it sort of helps us understand, what people are going through, what various different people have experienced due to this ongoing tension between the East and the West. So it's good stuff. Again, I don't feel like I have to justify that Spy Family is good. I didn't have to do it last time. I didn't even have to do it the second time. I'll still cover it down the road if it appears again. I didn't cover Code White, but I did watch it. I thought it was good. And, I still read the manga as it comes out, too. But the more I watch the anime Spy Family, the main thing I glean from it is that I wish Yor was my wife. I think the pain and the questionable cooking might be worth it, you know? One Punch Man, Season 3. I hate to end on a downer, but unfortunately, that's where we're at. Going back to Season 1, 10 plus years later, Season 1 of One Punch Man absolutely still holds up as a top-notch 12-episode season of anime. Top-notch. You know, visually, Season 1 is not better than a lot of the newer high-profile stuff, your Jujutsu Kaisens, My Hero Academia, whatever. But for 10 years ago in 2015, it was absolutely one of the best anime out there at the time, especially for something that gained mainstream attention in the West. That being said, we're 10 years down the line, and we've only gotten to episode 36, and the quality of Season 3 went down by about the same amount Season 2 did from Season 1. Again. How did they pull that off? We've only gotten 36 episodes of One Punch Man in like 10 plus years, and the quality of One Punch Man is at this level. You know, we waited 5 years for this Season 3. I think it's impossible not to be disappointed with this level of quality. Level of unquality. Disquality. Bad. I don't know what happened to have this show end up with JC staff, or how this is the result of 5 years of work, but I would really like for something to change here. Do I think the Season 3 is outright bad? No. I think it's watchable. I think it's uninspired and bland, and that's absolutely a shame for a work as good as One Punch Man. Especially since the manga is one of the most visually impactful manga ever made, I think it's fair to say. And there's nothing fun about this season visually. Nothing. Because even though a lot of the stuff throughout this season is sort of the build-up to the sort of higher points of the Monster Association arc, you know, it's mostly deliberation and talking. You can make those scenes fun and do creative things with them. But this adaptation does not. Like, you never guess this is One Punch Man. It feels like the most bland paint-by-numbers action anime. It feels like if a studio of overworked animators had 6 months to make an anime version of a Marvel movie 20 years ago. Now, again, all of that said, the funny moments are, I think, still funny. The characters are still weird and silly. And, you know, again, like I said, this is kind of the weird middle part of One Punch Man where they're building up to the bigger, more impactful parts of the Monster Association arc. It's honestly not the worst part of the series to end up looking like a PowerPoint, but I'm not going to let it off the hook just for that, especially since we got a Season 3 Part 2 announced by JC staff. If you watch One Punch Man for the fights and the visuals, you are indeed going to be very disappointed. If you watch One Punch Man for the comedy and the characters, you will still probably be disappointed. But basically everything besides the visuals are still there, so you take the good with the bad. But you might as well just read the manga at this point. It's basically the same experience. And that is all for my very late fall 2025 roundup. Gonna be a big one next season. I think I might hit 40 again. Will I be on time? Probably not. But we'll see. Some good stuff this season. I've started a bit of it. We shall see what happens. Shameless plug, I've been playing Arknights Enfield on Twitch. Uploading the archives to Silver Games, the Silver Games channel. So if you're interested, go check that out. Been fun so far. I've got a couple more covers from this season coming up. Doing Kaskanahana and Ignis. Might do Izo, not sure. But mostly this season was pretty good. Mostly.